One of the, as I said, stars of that film is the great publisher, also from Australia, Julian Assange. Thank you, Julian, for joining us today.
Hey, Randy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you for being part of this. You know, I've been trying to get you for about 6 months now, and I'm thrilled that you are on. I have the greatest journalist on the planet and the greatest publisher on the planet at the same time, and both are from Australia. You've known John for a long time?
I've certainly known of him for many decades, and I've known him personally for maybe 8 years now. And he's been a big supporter in the situation that I'm going through in this country.
Yes, and let's talk about that, what you're going through. A lot of people really don't understand why you are there. What did you do to be there and be a political prisoner inside that embassy?
Well, it's interesting. Do you need to do something in order to have a kind of modern interstate system make life very difficult for you and detain you without charge, in my case, for 7 years? I'm not sure you do. That's part of the problem when justice becomes arbitrary. The system doesn't just strike out at its critics. The institutions that comprise it are also fearsomely stupid, especially where they're engaged in secrecy, because excellence is not promoted by secrecy, because poor work can be covered up, or poorly performing contractors are not favored under contractors that perform well. So I'm not sure you do actually need to do anything wrong. The system can just come down on your head, and you can be swept up in it for decades. In my particular case, of course, I have rather specialized in my life since being a young teenager in provoking the hell out of it. So I do kind of understand that it's, in that sense, it's to be expected in the sort of world that I am living in, which is exposing these large and powerful organizations. And of course, by definition, if they're large and powerful, they have an ability to suppress their critics in one way or another. And I wouldn't say that it's particularly about suppressing me individually, but the example is they're perceived as terrible. It's like Cuba itself was, at least post-Cuban Missile Crisis, strategically not very important, but as an example to the rest of Latin America, it was extremely important in encouraging defiance of the will of the U.S. government and the various security complexes that make it up.
Do you, Julian Assange, believe that there's, I mean, I do. I mean, you mentioned this yesterday on another show about the modern McCarthyism. Could you elaborate on that?
I should answer your previous question properly, because I'm sure your listeners will be irritated. It's just I answer this question so often, it becomes a bit boring to just kind of look at the facts. But WikiLeaks started about a decade ago, and we publish authentic materials, official materials from all around the world. The U.S. produces an unusual number of them, so we tend to publish more from the U.S. than from other countries. And that's easily understandable when you realize that the U.S. has the most amount of money going into the secret state. So there's more than 5 million people in the United States with security clearances, well over 1.3 million with top secret security clearances. So that effectively is a state within a state. And then the cultural values expressed United States, its own self-story, has some honorable cultural traditions, and those come in conflict with the reality of U.S. foreign policy. So the tension between the two produces incentives for whistleblowers and dissidents to emerge. Then simply the scale of it means that quite a number of them do emerge. And so a grand jury was started in 2010, what the U.S. government internally called a whole-of-government investigation, criminal and intelligence investigation against me and other people in WikiLeaks. One of our alleged sources, Chelsea Manning, was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He was severely abused in 2011, 2012. UN Special Rapporteur on Torture formally found that he had been subject to cruel and inhumane treatment. That grand jury continues on in my case, and the U.S. government has just announced that it has expanded it to also include our recent CIA publications. It's run by the National Security Division of the DOJ and by the Criminal Division of the DOJ. It's a big thing. It spread agents all over the world, chartered private jets to Iceland, pulled people back to be secretly interrogated, coercively forced people to testify, and it's a there's an extensive series of legal maneuvers by my lawyers and the lawyers of Chelsea Manning, and also some NGOs in the United States to try and check that ongoing process. And in response to that, the government of Ecuador gave me political asylum in 2012, and there's a variety of complications of other legal processes. And I've been physically in the embassy since that point in time. Let me just kind of conclude with the most recent developments. On the 5th of February 2016, the UN announced its formal finding. I sued the states of the UK and Sweden at the United Nations, and I won, and it was ruled that I should be released immediately and compensated. The UK then appealed that ruling, and it lost on the 11th of November.
I see. And so where does it stand now? What is the legal battle ahead at this point in time? I mean, it's a two-front battle. You have the U.S., and then you have these trumped-up charges from Sweden.
No charges, Randy. No charges.
Right. I'm sorry, trumped-up allegations?
At any point in time.
Okay, all right. So you've never been charged with anything, that's the deal. You've never been charged. I'm sorry that I said that, but they keep throwing that out there. And so why does Sweden want you? Well,
Sweden has shifted in its position. So Sweden became well known this is an interesting story. I will try and get through it quickly. Going back to the 1920s, Sweden entered into that period of European utopianism that was there both on the Nazi right and that was present in the left. Both those elements were strongly present in Sweden, including the Nazi Party. Sweden itself had a relatively new vision of democracy. It's not, if you look at its origins, it's not really part of the Western European cultural process. It introduced political parties about the turn of the century. Then when it entered into World War II, it allied with Nazi Germany up until 1944, when it saw that the Nazis were going to lose, and then it started to shift its alignment to the United States. But it never properly denazified. There was no revolution or anything like that. And in the war period, Sweden became very rich. I'm not from Sweden, I'm an Australian, but I've become a bit of a Sweden nerd. In the war period, Sweden became very rich by breaking sanctions and setting up a lot of German fronts within Stockholm and shipping about 40% of all the iron ore to the German war machine. So it came out at the end of World War II with about 2 decades of advancement compared to the rest of Western Europe, and was one of the wealthiest countries in the world of any size. Its nearest rival being the United States. So it leapt forward about 10 years in terms of economic development, and the rest of Western Europe went back about 10 years. The result is that Sweden took on an appearance of accelerated modernity, and the utopian elements that had existed in the 1920s came together in this post-war period to produce not a classical social democracy, but something rather different. Sweden is the most oligarched country in Western Europe. What does that mean? It means that just a few families control more of the wealth in the country than any other country in Western Europe.
I had no
so
idea.
These giant Swedish industrialists were never stripped of their power by revolution or liberation as a result of kicking out an occupying force. Instead, a system of a merger between the industrialists, the oligarchs, you would say in a modern context, the unions and the political parties occurred. And that ended up producing what we would call a Swedish social democracy. And that then became famous as something as a kind of political phenomenon to be envied. I think looking back, it's really rather questionable how true that ever was. But by the 1980s, it had shifted its position and started to publicly ally itself with the West, but no one really cared by that point in time. Under the surface, it had entered into a secret intelligence sharing agreement by 1954 with the GCHQ in the United Kingdom and with the National Security Agency in the United States, and that went to a mass surveillance agreement in the early 2000s, and the Swedish military-industrial complex, which is a big part of the Swedish economy, sort of became very tightly integrated with the US and UK supply chain. So Sweden, as a state, it has its problems like all states. It has some good things going for it, but it is not in any way independent from the United States, unfortunately.
Well, I thank you for that history lesson. I had no idea. I mean, I look back at Sweden in the 80s. John Pilger is on the other line talking about Nicaragua. Olof Palme certainly helped out Nicaragua a lot, and that's the vision I have of Sweden back in the 80s. And I thought it was just recently they drifted on this right wing course. But that's
it's been happening. It's been happening since at least '86, when Olof Palme was assassinated in Sweden. Yeah, but I mean, there was a period of time, about 5 years really, where Sweden was supplying about a quarter of the budget of the ANC, not for very long, and was also taking a number of refugees from Chile under Pinochet, routed through its embassy system and so on. So it's interesting to think what that was about. Sweden historically is a country of empire, but as Western Europe, other Western European countries got bigger, it hasn't been able to kind of seriously invade countries out of its borders for about 200 years now. But it does have a certain ideological, empirical ambition from time to time, and that has allied with particular other ideological or geopolitical tendencies in the rest of the world as time has gone by. But since the late 80s, it's been very much in the embrace of the United States.
That's some analysis there.
But they don't like to. They don't like to say it.
I know they have this image of being some progressive nation like Switzerland being neutral. But I got to move away from that because we have 4 minutes left here. This is moving very quickly. We got less than 4 minutes. All right, so I have to ask. This whole thing about Russia and trying to vilify you as some agent of the Russians. It's complete garbage. What is your response to that?
Well, it is complete garbage. We've published more than 600,000 documents about Russia, Vladimir Putin. Many of those documents have gone on to legal court cases, and books have been written about the Russian organized crime as a result of our publication. So it's just complete nonsense. If you look at what the allegations are about our non-electoral publications, well, about a year and a half ago, we published John Brennan's emails, the last Obama head of the Central Intelligence Agency. The allegation there, that everyone doesn't say very much about it because it doesn't help them politically, is that those were hacked by a 16-year-old boy in the UK Midlands. And he had a pal in the United States who's about 22 who helped promote him. That's the allegation. And they've been formally charged. Our most recent publication about the Central Intelligence Agency, a very serious publication. In fact, it's the largest intelligence publication in history, or will be by the time it's complete. Definitely the largest known intelligence leak in history. The allegation by the U.S. government is that originates from a contractor. They haven't worked out which one yet, they say. But that's the allegation. So, yeah, I mean, it's very boring in a way. It's Democrats. Yeah. It's obvious stuff. It's the Democratic Party, normally on election loss, would go through a hell of a recrimination game and see who was responsible for the loss and purge them from their positions of influence and replace them with others.
Right.
That was a historical moment that the Democrats could have had.
They certainly could have. My opinion is this.
They could have had that. They could have had it, but they were successful in hyping up this Russian narrative and thereby distracting from what would be the normal course of events.
I would like to invite you back next week. This is just the beginning. I want to talk about Vault number 7, about Grasshopper. There's so much to talk about. We just barely broached some of the things that are on my notes here. I want to thank Julian Assange, the greatest publisher, man of great integrity, John Pilger, one of the greatest journalists around today. The two of you say goodbye to each other, and we'll...
Randy, I'm not saying goodbye to John. Good to hear you. But Randy, I just want to say it's Julian Assange and WikiLeaks that have returned honor to journalism. Julian is a truth teller, and that's what has upset those who continue what Goebbels called the big lie.
I certainly agree with you. Thank you both. This has been a very quick hour. This is Randy Credico, live on the fly. Two great men from Australia. Thank you both, and we'll see you next week at the same time here on WBAI.